The house on Willow Lane stood silent under the weight of winter's first snow. Its white clapboard siding seemed to shiver beneath the gray sky, and inside the air felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. Julia Turner sat at the dining room table, her hands trembling as she gripped her phone. The screen displayed a text from an unknown number, a message that had unraveled her world in seconds. "You deserve to know the truth. He's been lying to you for months. Ask him about Rachel." Her gaze lifted to the hallway mirror, catching her own reflection. Wide eyes, pale skin, lips pressed tight to hold back the sob threatening to escape. Her chest heaved as the betrayal settled deep within her, a wound raw and festering. She heard the hum of the garage door and the familiar thud of boots against the tiled floor. Ethan's voice broke the silence. "Jules, I got dinner. Your favorite, pad thai from Lotus Garden." His footsteps grew closer, easy and casual, the sound of a man who believed his world was intact. She looked up as he entered the room, brown paper bags in his hands, snowflakes dusting his dark hair. He smiled, and the sight made her stomach twist. How could he look at her so warmly while hiding something so ugly? Julia took a deep breath, feeling the icy air fill her lungs before releasing it. Her voice came out steady, sharper than she intended. "Who's Rachel?" His face changed instantly, a flicker of shock before he masked it with confusion. "What?" She tossed her phone onto the table, the text still visible. "Rachel? Who is she?" Ethan's jaw tightened. He set the bags down, his hands suddenly finding his pockets, a defensive gesture she knew all too well. "Where did you get that?" "That's not an answer," she shot back, rising from her chair. Her eyes locked on his, daring him to lie to her again. "Who is she?" He looked away, his shoulders sinking. Julia's chest constricted as she watched his defenses crumble. There was no need for an answer. His silence spoke louder than words. She felt the room spin, her legs weakening. "Oh, God, it's true. You're having an affair." "Jules, listen." He reached for her, but she pulled back, a flash of pain crossing his face. "It's not what you think. It was a mistake. Just once. Don't you dare minimize this," she snapped, her voice cracking. "Who is she?" Ethan swallowed, hard, his hands falling helplessly at his sides. She's a colleague. From marketing. It just happened. I never meant for it to—" "You never meant for it." Julia's laugh was bitter, hollow. "You never meant for it to happen, or you never meant for me to find out?" His silence confirmed the latter. Her knees buckled, and she sank back into the chair, her hands gripping the table for support. "How long?" 6 months. His voice was small, barely above a whisper. Julia felt her heart shatter. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of deception, of thinking they were happy. She looked at him, really looked at him as if seeing a stranger for the first time. The man she loved, the father of her children, the person she trusted most in the world, had betrayed her. She stared at her reflection in the mirror across the room. Her eyes were hollow, haunted by betrayal. She thought of their children upstairs, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing below. Her voice was cold, detached. "Did you love her?" Ethan's eyes widened, panic flashing across his face. "No. God, no. It was never about that. I was stressed. Work's been insane, and I felt, I don't know, trapped. It was stupid. Meaningless." Julia's mouth twisted in disgust. "Meaningless? You betrayed me, our family, and it meant nothing?" She rose again, her body shaking with fury. "How could you do this? How could you look me in the eye every day and lie?" Tears filled his eyes, his voice breaking. "I was selfish. I never wanted to hurt you. I hate myself for this, Jules. Please. Please believe me." "Believe you?" She scoffed, shaking her head. You want me to believe you? After 6 months of lies? Why should I believe anything you say? I'll end it. I already have. I swear. It's over. He stepped closer, his eyes pleading. I love you. I love our family. I made the biggest mistake of my life, and I will do whatever it takes to fix this. Julia felt her chest tighten. A part of her wanted to believe him, to pretend this was just a nightmare she'd wake from. But reality had already shattered that illusion. You don't get to decide that, she whispered, her voice trembling. You already made your choice. You chose her. Ethan's face fell, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his guilt. He reached out, his fingers grazing hers before she pulled away. I don't want to lose you, Jules. Please, don't leave me. She looked at him, at the man she thought she knew, and felt her heart break all over again. You already lost. Me? She whispered, her voice cracking. The day you betrayed me, you lost me. Julia turned away, tears streaming down her face as she walked toward the stairs. Julia stayed by the window long after Ethan's car disappeared from sight, her breath fogging the glass as she tried to make sense of everything. 6 months. How had she not noticed? How had she been so blind? Her fingers trembled as she pulled the curtain closed, shutting out the winter world. The house felt colder now, emptier, echoing with the weight of his absence. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to release the rage twisting inside her. But upstairs their children were sleeping, unaware of the fracture that had split, their family in two. She sank to the floor, her back pressed against the wall, knees drawn to her chest. Her phone buzzed on the table, the screen flashing with a new message from the unknown number. Her heart raced as she reached for it, her hands shaking as she read the words. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but you deserve better. You deserve the truth. Julia's fingers hovered over the screen. Who was this? And how did they know? Was it Rachel herself? Some twisted attempt at honesty or revenge? Or was it someone else who had seen through Ethan's lies long before she did? Her mind spun with questions, each one more painful than the last. She could almost hear Ethan's voice, his pleading words echoing in her head. It meant nothing. It was a mistake. But how could 6 months of deception mean nothing? How could he betray her so deeply and still claim to love her? Her vision blurred as tears spilled over, burning hot against her cold skin. She remembered their last anniversary, the romantic dinner he'd planned, the way he'd held her close, and whispered how lucky he was to have her. Had he been lying even then? Had Rachel already been a part of his life? The pain was unbearable, a physical ache that threatened to consume her. She wanted to hate him, to scream at him, to make him feel even a fraction of the hurt he'd caused her. But beneath the anger, she felt a deeper, more terrifying emotion, grief. She was mourning the man she thought she knew, the life she thought they shared. And she didn't know if she could ever get it back. Her phone buzzed again, breaking through her spiraling thoughts. This time it was a call. Ethan. His name flashed on the screen, and for a moment she almost answered. But her fingers froze, paralyzed by the memory of his lies. She let the call go to voicemail, her heart aching with every ring. A soft knock came at the bedroom door, followed by a small voice. Mommy? Julia's head snapped up, her chest tightening. She quickly wiped her tears, forcing herself to breathe before opening the door. Her daughter, Lily, stood there, clutching her teddy bear, her brown eyes wide with worry. I heard you crying, she whispered. Are you okay? Julia's heart shattered all over again. She knelt down, gathering her daughter in her arms, holding her close as she fought to keep her voice steady. I'm okay, baby. Just had a sad moment. Lily pulled back, her little hand resting on Julia's cheek. Did Daddy make you sad? Julia's breath caught in her throat. She looked into her daughter's innocent eyes and felt the weight of the truth pressing down on her. How could she explain this to her? How could she protect her from the pain of their broken marriage? "No, sweetheart," she lied, her voice trembling. "Mommy just had a bad dream. That's all." Lily seemed to accept this, nodding before giving her mother a sleepy hug. "Will you tuck me in?" Of course. Julia followed her daughter down the hall, her heart aching with every step. She sat by Lily's bed, stroking her hair as she drifted back to sleep, her little face peaceful and untroubled. When she was sure Lily was asleep, Julia crept back to her bedroom, her heart heavy with guilt. She hated lying to her daughter, but how could she explain what Ethan had done? How could she shatter her daughter's image of her father? Her phone buzzed again, another call from Ethan. She stared at it, her finger hovering over the screen before finally pressing play on his voicemail. His voice was raw, broken, pleading. "Jules, please, I need to talk to you. I know I hurt you. I can't take back what I did, but I want to fix this. I love you. I love our family. Please, don't shut me out." Julia's chest tightened, tears slipping down her cheeks. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to pretend this was just a nightmare she'd wake from. But the truth was out now, and there was no going back. She deleted the message, her hands shaking as she blocked his number. She needed space, needed time to think, to breathe. She couldn't face him now, not with her heart in pieces, sliding. Into bed, Julia pulled the covers tight around her, curling into herself as the cold crept in. She closed her eyes, praying for sleep, for escape from the pain that felt like it would never end. But even as exhaustion claimed her, her mind continued to race. Who had sent that message? Why had they chosen now to reveal the truth? And most haunting of all, had it really ended? Morning light seeped through the blinds, pale and gray, casting faint stripes across the bedroom floor. Julia lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind heavy with the remnants of fitful dreams. She could still hear Ethan's voice echoing in, her head pleading for forgiveness, for a second chance. But every time she tried to picture his face, it blurred and morphed into Rachel's, a woman she barely knew but had come to hate. A soft knock on the door jolted her from her thoughts. "Mommy? Can we have pancakes?" Julia forced herself to sit up, smoothing her hair as she called back, "I'll be right there, honey." Downstairs, she moved through the familiar routine, mixing batter, heating the griddle, flipping pancakes, all while her mind played out every conversation she'd had with Ethan over the past 6 months, looking for signs she might have missed. Lily's laughter broke through her reverie, and Julia turned to see her daughter making faces at her little brother, Noah, who giggled as he smeared syrup across his face. A lump rose in Julia's throat. How could she keep their world intact when hers was falling apart? Her phone buzzed on the counter. Another unknown number. Her chest tightened, fingers trembling as she picked it up. She hesitated before answering. "Hello?" Silence. Then a soft, hesitant voice. "Julia?" Her heart dropped. She recognized that voice. Rachel. Her grip tightened on the phone, her nails digging into her palm. "What the hell do you want?" I need to talk to you, please. I know you hate me, but I owe you the truth." Julia's jaw clenched. "I already know the truth. You slept with my husband for 6 months and lied to my face. What more is there to say?" Rachel's breath hitched on the other end. "It's not just that. There are things you don't know. About Ethan. About why it happened." Julia's pulse quickened, anger flaring hot and fast. "Don't you dare try to justify this. You're just as guilty as he is." "I know," Rachel whispered, her voice cracking. "I know I hurt you, but please, I need you to understand. Can we meet? Just once? I promise. After that, I'll leave you alone." Julia's instinct was to hang up, to shut her out. But the curiosity gnawed at her, a bitter itch she couldn't ignore. Why would Rachel reach out now? And what could she possibly say that would make any of this make sense? Fine, Julia bit out, hating herself even as she said it. Tomorrow, noon, at the cafe on Maple Street. One chance. You better make it worth it. She ended the call before Rachel could respond, her hand shaking as she set the phone down. Lily tugged at her sleeve, her eyes wide. Mommy, are you okay? Julia forced a smile, her heart breaking as she smoothed her daughter's hair. I'm fine, sweetheart. Finish your breakfast, okay? But even as she said the words, her mind was spinning, racing through all the possibilities of what tomorrow's conversation might reveal. And for the first time since she'd learned of Ethan's betrayal, she felt a flicker of something else. Fear. What if the truth was even worse than she imagined? The cafe was warm, smelling of roasted coffee and cinnamon. Julia arrived early, choosing a corner booth where she could watch the door. She wrapped her hands around a steaming mug of tea, her fingers numb despite the heat. She saw Rachel before. Rachel saw her standing in the doorway with a hesitant, almost fearful expression. Her face was pale, framed by messy blonde curls, her eyes swollen with sleeplessness. Julia watched as she scanned the cafe, her shoulders sagging with relief when she finally spotted her. Rachel approached slowly, as if expecting Julia to lash out or run away. She slid into the booth, her eyes downcast, hands twisting nervously. Thank you for meeting me. Julia said nothing, her jaw clenched as she stared at the woman who had destroyed her marriage. Up close, Rachel looked even. Younger, fragile, her face lined with guilt. Julia hated her for looking so pathetic, for stirring even a shred of pity within her. Rachel took a shaky breath, her voice trembling. I don't know where to start. How about why you did it? Julia's voice was cold, sharp as glass. How about why you slept with my husband and lied to my face for 6 months? Rachel flinched, tears welling in her eyes. I was stupid, selfish, but it's more than that. Ethan, he was different with me. He was broken. Julia's heart twisted painfully. Broken? What the hell does that mean? Rachel looked, down, her shoulders shaking. He told me he was unhappy, that you didn't love him anymore, that you were distant, distracted, that you were only staying together for the kids. She looked up, her eyes pleading. I know that's no excuse, but I believed him. I thought I was helping him. Julia's breath caught, her anger shifting to confusion. Helping him? By destroying our family? Rachel's face crumpled. I know. I was wrong. I was so wrong. But he told me things about his past, about his dad, about why he's so messed up. Julia's head spun as she drove home, Rachel's words echoing in her mind. I think someone wanted you to find out. Who would do that? Who even knew about the affair? Ethan had sworn it was over before anyone found out, but someone had known, and someone had sent that message. As she pulled into the driveway, her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Can we please talk tonight? I miss the kids, and I miss you. Her stomach clenched. She still hadn't replied to his last dozen messages. She hadn't been able to bring herself to speak to him since the night she'd confronted him, screaming until her throat was raw. He'd cried, begged for forgiveness, but she couldn't look at him without seeing Rachel's face, without feeling the knife twist deeper. She shoved the phone into her purse and went inside, greeted by Lily's laughter and Noah's happy babbling. Her mother looked up from the kitchen table, a worried crease between her brows. How did it go? Julia hesitated, glancing at her children, their innocent faces oblivious to the chaos tearing her apart. Not here, she whispered, nodding toward the hallway. Once they were out of earshot, Julia leaned against the wall, her legs trembling. She said she didn't send the message. She claims someone else did. Someone who wanted me to find out. Her mother's eyes widened. Who would do that? I don't know, Julia murmured, rubbing her temples. But she seemed scared, and She knew things about Ethan, things he never told me. Her mother's mouth tightened. You're not seriously believing her, are you? She's the woman who slept with your husband. She'd say anything to manipulate you. Julia hesitated, uncertainty gnawing at her. She wanted to hate Rachel, to dismiss everything she said as lies. But the fear in her eyes, the way her voice had trembled, it didn't feel like an act. And the letter. Ethan's words were real. She knew his handwriting, his way of speaking. He'd wanted to confess. He'd wanted to end it, but he hadn't. And now she was left with more questions than answers. Her mother's expression softened, her hand resting on Julia's shoulder. Maybe it's time you talk to Ethan. Really talk to him. Julia's chest tightened. I don't know if I can. Every time I see him, I want to hurt him as much as he hurt me. I know, sweetheart. Her mother's eyes were sad, her voice gentle. But if you don't get answers, you'll never be able to move on, one way or another. Julia swallowed the lump in her throat, nodding reluctantly. You're right. That evening, she sat across from Ethan at the dining room table, the same table where they'd shared countless family dinners, laughed over spilled milk and told bedtime stories. Now it felt like a stranger's house, the air thick with tension. Ethan looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his face pale and gaunt. He fidgeted with his wedding ring, twisting it around his finger before finally meeting her gaze. Thank you for letting me come over. I miss the kids. And you. Julia's chest tightened, but she forced herself to stay composed. This isn't about us. Not yet. I need you to tell me the truth, Ethan, all of it. His shoulders slumped, his eyes flickering with shame. I've told you everything. I cheated. I was weak. I made the worst mistake of my life. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right if you'll let me. That's not enough. Her voice was cold, unyielding. Rachel said she didn't send the message. She said someone else did. Is that true? Ethan's eyes widened in shock. What? I don't know. I thought she did. Who else would have known? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Julia crossed her arms, studying his face. Did you tell anyone? Did anyone else know about the affair? He hesitated, his gaze dropping. No, I was ashamed. I didn't want anyone to find out. I didn't even tell Marcus, and he's my best friend. Julia's stomach twisted. Are you sure? Ethan looked up, his eyes earnest. I swear. I kept it secret from everyone, even myself most days. I hated what I was doing, but I couldn't stop. I was messed up. His voice broke, his hands trembling as he ran them through his hair. I was terrified of losing you. I thought you didn't love me anymore, that we were only together for the kids. I was stupid and selfish and weak. Julia's throat tightened, memories flashing through her mind. Late nights spent working, arguments about schedules, the way they'd drifted apart without even noticing. Had she really been that distant? Had he felt that alone? She pushed the thought away, her voice hardening. That doesn't justify what you did. I know, Ethan whispered, his eyes filling with tears. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to understand. I never stopped loving you. Not for a second. His words cut deep, stirring old wounds, but Julia forced herself to stay focused. If you didn't tell anyone, then who did? Who would want me to find out? Julia's mind raced, her thoughts spiraling into a dark labyrinth of suspicion and fear. Adam. He knew everything, and he had played them both, pulling the strings from the shadows. She remembered the smug look on his face that night, the way he'd lingered just out of sight as she confronted Ethan. He'd watched it all unfold, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Ethan's voice was a hollow whisper, breaking through her haze. I never thought... I didn't think he'd go this far. Julia's jaw tightened, fury rising within her. How could you be so blind? He's hated you for years. Why did you let him into our lives? Ethan's shoulders sagged, guilt etching, deep lines on his face. He was my brother. He said he needed help, that he was trying to get his life together. I thought I owed him that much. Julia's eyes narrowed, her fists clenching. So you gave him a place in our home. You let him get close to our children, and all along he was plotting to destroy us. Ethan's head bowed, his voice cracking. I didn't know. I was too busy hiding my own mistakes to see what he was doing. Julia's heart pounded, anger and fear twisting inside her. Adam had watched her life fall apart, knowing he was the cause. He had manipulated them both, and she had been too blinded by pain to see it. The doorbell rang, jolting them out of their tense silence. Julia's body went rigid, her eyes flicking toward the door. Who could that be? Ethan frowned, glancing at his watch. It's late. Maybe your mom forgot something? But Julia's instincts screamed otherwise. Her stomach twisted as she walked to the door, her hand hesitating on the knob. She glanced back at Ethan, his face pale with worry. He gave a slight nod. She opened the door and her heart stopped. Adam stood on the porch, his eyes cold, lips curled into a smug smile. Hey, sis. His voice was calm, almost casual. Mind if I come in? Julia's blood ran cold, her body frozen in place. What are you doing here? Adam's eyes flicked past her, landing on Ethan. I heard you two were having some issues. Thought I'd drop by and see how you're holding up. His words were laced with mockery, his smirk widening as he took in their stunned faces. Julia's skin crawled, realization dawning on her. He knew exactly how much damage he'd caused, and he was here to watch them break. Ethan's face darkened, his fists clenching at his sides. You did this! You sent that message! Adam's expression didn't falter. If anything, his eyes gleamed with satisfaction. I don't know what you're talking about. He stepped forward, his presence suffocating, filling the room with his malice. But I did tell you, secrets always come out. Sooner or later, Julia's heart raced, her mind flashing back to all the little moments she had ignored. The times Adam had been too interested in their arguments, his calculated questions about Ethan's late nights. He had been watching them all along, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She looked at Ethan, his face pale with fury and shame. You let him in. You let him destroy us. Ethan's face crumpled, his shoulders shaking. I didn't know. I swear, Julia, I didn't. Oh, don't blame him, Adam cut in, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. He was just as clueless as you were. But I've always been good at staying in the shadows. Julia's blood boiled, her anger surging. Why? Her voice was a strangled whisper. Why would you do this? Adam's eyes went cold, his smile fading. You took everything from me. You and your perfect little family. The life that should have been mine. While I got stuck cleaning up Dad's mess, Ethan got everything handed to him on a silver platter. The house, the career, the wife. His gaze lingered on Julia, his eyes darkening. I just made sure you saw him for what he really is, a liar, a cheat. Ethan lunged forward, his face twisted with rage. You bastard! Julia stepped between them, her voice icy. Get out! Adam's expression shifted, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before his mask of arrogance returned. You're really going to take his side? After everything? He did! Julia's eyes blazed, her voice trembling with fury. This isn't about sides. You used us. You broke my family and you enjoyed it. Adam's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing. You don't get it, do you? I didn't break your family. He did. All I did was show you the truth. Julia's chest tightened, his words cutting deep, but she stood her ground, her chin high. "Get out, and don't come near my family again." Adam's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "You'll regret this, Julia." She didn't flinch, her voice steady. "No, you will." Adam's lips twisted into a sneer, his gaze flicking to Ethan. "She's stronger than you deserve." He turned on his heel, his footsteps echoing as he walked away, disappearing into the night. The door closed with a hollow thud, the house falling into a heavy silence. Julia stood motionless, her body trembling with adrenaline. Days passed in a haze, the weight of betrayal pressing down on Julia's chest. She moved through the house like a ghost, numb and hollow, her heart aching with a pain that refused to fade. She barely spoke to Ethan, her words clipped and cold, when she did. He stayed in the guest room, his presence a constant reminder of everything they had lost. She threw herself into work, burying the pain beneath endless tasks and meetings. But the nights were unbearable, the silence heavy and suffocating. She would lie awake for hours, her mind replaying every conversation, every lie. How could I have been so blind? Adam's face haunted her, his mocking smile etched in her memory. He had taken everything from her, turning her life into a cruel game. And Ethan had given him the pieces to destroy them. The doorbell rang, jolting her from her thoughts. Her heart leapt, a flicker of fear tightening her chest. Adam! But when she opened the door, her mother stood on the porch, her face lined with worry. "Julia, are you all right? You haven't returned my calls." Her voice was gentle, her eyes searching Julia's face. Julia forced a smile, stepping back to let her in. "I've been busy." Her mother's gaze swept over the house, taking in the scattered mail, the dishes piling up in the sink. Her frown deepened. "Where's Ethan?" Julia's body went rigid, her shoulders tensing. "He's working late." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, the weight of it heavy in her chest. But she couldn't tell her mother the truth. Not yet. Her mother's eyes softened, her voice low. "I saw Adam the other day." Julia's heart stopped, her breath catching. "What?" He was at the grocery store. He seemed different, angry. I asked him if everything was all right. "But he just brushed me off." Her mother's face tightened, her worry deepening. "I always thought he had a temper, but... Julia, is something going on?" Julia swallowed, her mind racing. Adam was still around, lurking in the shadows. She could feel his presence, like a dark cloud hanging over her. She forced a smile, her voice steady. "No, everything's fine." But her mother didn't look convinced. She reached out, her hand resting on Julia's arm. "If you need to talk, I'm here. You know that, right?" Julia's throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes. But she blinked them back, her jaw clenched. She couldn't break down, not yet. Not until she figured out what to do. "I know. Thanks, Mom." Her mother lingered a moment longer before pulling her into a hug, her embrace warm and comforting. But it only made the emptiness inside Julia more unbearable. After her mother left, Julia stood in the doorway, staring out at the dark street. Her mind churned with questions, anger simmering beneath the surface. Adam was still out there, watching, waiting, and she couldn't let him win. She went to the guest room, her fists clenched as she opened the door. Ethan looked up, his face pale and worn. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, his shoulders hunched in defeat. Julia's voice was cold, her eyes hard. "We need to talk." Ethan's face tightened, his body tensing. "Okay." She crossed her arms, her gaze piercing. "Why did he hate you so much? What did you do to him?" Ethan's eyes flickered with pain, his jaw tightening. "It wasn't just one thing. It was everything. Our father always favored me, gave me the family business, the house. Adam got nothing." Julia's chest tightened, her anger boiling. So you knew he resented you? You knew he was bitter? And you still let him into our home? Ethan's shoulders sagged, his face crumpling. I thought he just needed a second chance. I didn't realize how much he hated me. Hated us. Julia's heart twisted, her voice breaking. He didn't just hate you, Ethan. He wanted to destroy us. And you gave him the perfect opportunity. Ethan's face paled, his eyes glistening with tears. I know. I'm sorry. I was stupid. I was selfish. I should have seen it. Julia's jaw clenched, her hands trembling. I don't know if I can forgive you. Ethan's face crumpled, his body sagging. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll do anything to make it right. Julia's heart ached, torn between anger and pain. She wanted to scream, to hurt him the way he had hurt her, but she couldn't. Not yet. She turned away, her voice hollow. I don't know what I want. I need time. Ethan's voice was a broken whisper. Take all the time you need. I'll wait, no matter how long it takes. Julia closed the door behind her, her heart heavy. She didn't know if she could ever forgive him, but she did know one thing. Adam wasn't done with them. Not yet. And she wouldn't let him win. As the night closed in, Julia stood by the window, staring out into the darkness. Adam was out there, lurking in the shadows, watching. She could feel his eyes on her, his presence like a cold chill down her spine. But she wouldn't run. She wouldn't hide. Adam wanted to destroy her family. But she would fight back, even if it meant facing the darkness herself. The days grew colder, the skies heavy with winter's gloom. Julia felt the weight of the season pressing down on her, each day blurring into the next. But beneath the numbness, anger burned. Adam had shattered her life, torn her marriage apart. She wouldn't rest until he paid for what he had done. The first step was gathering information. She went through old photos, letters, anything that could give her insight into Adam's past. She found a box of childhood pictures in the attic, dusty and forgotten. There were dozens of photos of Ethan and Adam as children, smiling side by side. She studied each one, searching for signs of jealousy, of resentment. But all she saw were two brothers, inseparable. When did it change? When did love turn to hate? Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from her friend. Lisa, hey, heard Adam's back in town. You okay? Julia's chest tightened. She hadn't told anyone the truth, hadn't admitted how deeply he had betrayed her. But Lisa's message confirmed what she already suspected. Adam was still here, still lurking. Her hands trembled as she typed back. Yeah, I'm fine, just busy. With work. It was a lie, but she didn't have the energy to explain. She needed answers first. She called Ethan, her voice cold and clipped. We need to talk. Now. He arrived an hour later, his shoulders hunched, his eyes bloodshot. He looked exhausted, defeated. But she couldn't let herself feel sorry for him. Not after what he'd done. She crossed her arms, her gaze hard. I need to know everything about Adam, every fight, every grudge, every secret. Ethan's face tightened, guilt flashing in his eyes. Julia, I told you everything. No, you didn't. Her voice was ice, her anger bubbling to the surface. You told me the parts that made you look like the victim. But I need the whole story. I need to know why he hates you so much. Ethan's jaw clenched, his body tensing. Fine. He took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging. You're right. I haven't told you everything. Julia's chest tightened, her heart pounding. She braced herself for the truth, whatever it was. Ethan sank into the armchair, his head in his hands. Adam and I were close growing up. But everything changed when our father died. He left the business to me, not Adam. He said Adam was too reckless, too unreliable. But Adam, he was devastated. He thought Dad didn't love him, that he wasn't good enough. Julia's eyes narrowed, her anger sharpening. And you just took it? You didn't fight for him? Ethan's face crumpled, shame washing over him. I didn't know how. I was grieving too. And I thought Adam would get over it. But he didn't. He spiraled. He started drinking, getting into trouble. We fought all the time. And then he left, cut off contact for years. Julia's heart ached, a knot tightening in her chest. And you never reached out? Never tried to make things right? Ethan shook his head, his voice hollow. I was stubborn. I thought it was his responsibility to come back. I didn't realize how much he was hurting. Julia's anger wavered, a sliver of pity breaking through. She could see it now, the tangled web of resentment and pain that had festered between the brothers for years. But it didn't excuse what Adam had done. She straightened, her voice firm. Adam's still out there. He's watching us, waiting. We need to stop him before he destroys us completely. Ethan's face paled, fear flickering in his eyes. What are you saying? Julia's gaze was cold, unyielding. We need to fight back. Together. Ethan's shoulders sagged, his face twisting in anguish. After everything I did, you still want my help? Julia's heart tightened, her voice low. I don't trust you, but I need you. Ethan's eyes glistened with tears, his body trembling. I'll do whatever it takes. Just tell me what to do. Julia's jaw clenched, her anger hardening into resolve. We find Adam. We expose him, and we end this once and for all. They worked late into the night, piecing together every scrap of information they had on Adam. Julia's chest tightened with every discovery, her anger simmering. Adam had been planning this for years, his revenge meticulously crafted. Ethan's face was pale, his hands shaking as he read through the messages Adam had sent, the lies he had spun. He wanted to ruin me, to take everything. Julia's eyes were cold, her voice steely. And he almost did. But they wouldn't let him win. Not this time. They found their first lead the next day. Lisa called, her voice shaky. I saw him, Julia. Adam. He was at the bar talking to some guy. Looked shady. I don't know what they were planning, but it didn't seem good. Julia's heart raced, her fingers tightening around the phone. Where? Lisa gave her the address, her voice trembling. Be careful, Julia. I don't trust him. Julia hung up, her mind racing. Adam was still in town, still plotting, and she was done playing the victim. She grabbed her coat, her jaw clenched. The bar loomed ahead, its neon sign flickering in the darkness. Julia's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she parked across the street, her eyes fixed on the entrance. Shadows moved behind the grimy windows, silhouettes shifting and swaying to muffled music. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Her pulse was racing, fear coiling in her stomach. But she couldn't turn back now, not when she was this close. As she stepped out of the car, the cold night air bit at her skin, the wind howling through the empty street. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself, her eyes scanning the area. If Adam was here, he wouldn't be alone. He was too careful, too cunning. She crossed the street, her footsteps echoing against the pavement. Her heart pounded as she reached the door, the muffled music growing louder. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. This is it. No turning back. She pushed the door open, the heavy smell of alcohol and smoke washing over her. The bar was dimly lit, shadows dancing across stained walls. A handful of patrons sat hunched over their drinks, faces blurred by the haze. Julia moved quickly, her eyes scanning the room. She didn't see him. Not yet. but he was here. She could feel it. She moved toward the back, her body tense, ready. And then she saw him. Adam was leaning against the wall, his face half hidden in shadow. He was talking to a man in a dark coat, his expression cold, calculating. Julia's heart stopped, anger and fear crashing over her. "You're not getting away, this time." She stepped closer, her body pressed against the wall, straining to hear their conversation. Adam's voice was low, his words sharp. "I don't care how you do it. Just make sure he's ruined. I want him to lose everything." Julia's chest tightened, her nails digging into her palms. He was still scheming, still trying to destroy Ethan. Even after everything, his hatred hadn't waned. The man in the dark coat nodded, his face grim. "It's risky. If they find out—" "They won't," Adam snapped, his eyes flashing. "Just do your job." The man hesitated, his gaze shifting. "And the woman?" Julia's heart lurched. "Me. They're talking about me." Adam's expression hardened, his jaw clenched. "She's nothing. Just a pawn. I used her to get to him. Now she's in the way." Julia's vision blurred, pain stabbing through her chest. Just a pawn. That's all she was to him. Nothing more. She felt her anger, rising, hot and fierce, her body trembling. She wanted to scream, to confront him, but she couldn't. Not yet. She needed proof. She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she started recording. She had to get this on tape. She had to expose him, to show the world who he really was. The man in the coat nodded, his voice low. "Understood. I'll take care of it." Adam's lips curled into a cold smile. "Good. Make sure they both suffer. I want him destroyed. And her." His eyes gleamed, his voice dripping with malice. "Make her disappear." Julia's blood ran cold, her heart pounding in her chest. He was planning to get rid of her, permanently. She took a step back, her body trembling. She had to get out of there, had to warn Ethan. She turned, her movements quick and silent, slipping out the door and into the freezing night. Her breath came in short gasps as she ran to her car, her hands shaking as she fumbled for her keys. She had the evidence she needed. She could bring him down, but she was in danger. Adam wouldn't hesitate to hurt her, to silence her. She started the car, her tires screeching as she sped away, her heart racing. She needed to get somewhere safe, but where? Who could she trust? The answer came to her in a flash. Ethan, he was. The only one who understood, the only one who could help her now. She dialed his number, her fingers trembling. It rang twice before he picked up, his voice groggy. "Julia? What's going on?" Her voice was frantic, her fear spilling out. "I found him. I found Adam. He's planning something. Something terrible. We need to meet. Now." Ethan's voice sharpened, his exhaustion vanishing. "Where are you? Are you safe?" "I'm on my way to your place. I'll explain everything when I get there." She hung up before he could protest, her hands gripping the wheel. The night stretched out before her, dark and endless. She could feel Adam's shadow behind her, his presence looming. But she wouldn't let him win. Not this time. She arrived at Ethan's house, her body tense, her heart pounding. He opened the door, his face pale, eyes wide with worry. "Julia," she pushed past him, her voice trembling. "I have proof. I recorded him. He's planning to ruin you, and he wants me gone. For good." Ethan's face went white, his body rigid. "What?" She showed him the recording, her hands shaking as Adam's voice filled the room. Ethan's face contorted, fury blazing in his eyes. He planned all of this from the beginning." Julia's jaw tightened, her voice hard. "We need to stop him, before he hurts us, before he ruins everything." Ethan's eyes were fixed on the phone screen, his face illuminated by the cold blue light. The recording played on repeat, Adam's voice echoing through the room, dripping with malice. Just a pawn. I used her to get to him. Make her disappear. Julia watched him, her stomach churning. She could see his fury building, his hands shaking, his jaw clenched so tightly she thought it might break. His breathing grew ragged, his chest heaving. "Ethan." She reached out, touching his arm. His muscles were tense, vibrating with anger. "We need to go to the police. This is enough to—" He pulled away, his movements sharp, his eyes blazing. "No! The police can't fix this. They won't understand. They'll take this recording, slap him on the wrist, and he'll walk free. And then he'll come for us." His voice was cold, frighteningly calm. Julia shivered. "We need to be smart. We need to be careful." His eyes met hers, his gaze piercing. "I'm done being careful. I'm done playing by the rules while he tries to destroy my life." His lips curled into a grim smile. "He thinks he can ruin me. He thinks he can threaten you." He shook his head, his voice hard. "No. He's the one who's going to suffer." Fear twisted in her chest. She stepped closer, her voice urgent. "Ethan, don't do this. Don't let him turn you into someone you're not." He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Someone I'm not? Julia? He's been playing us from the start. He seduced you just to hurt me. He's trying to take everything I've built. And now he wants you dead." His eyes darkened, his expression fierce. He's a monster. And the only way to stop a monster is to become one. Julia's heart sank, her throat tightening. She could see it happening. The darkness consuming him, changing him. She had to stop it. She had to save him. "We can find another way. We'll go to the police together. We'll show them the recording. We'll—" Ethan's voice was cold, unyielding. "The police can't protect you. Not from him." His jaw tightened, his eyes blazing with determination. "But I can." He turned, his movements quick, purposeful. He grabbed his coat, his keys, his expression set. Panic surged through her. She stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Where are you going?" He looked at her, his eyes distant. "To end this." "No!" She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his skin. "Ethan, please, don't do this. Don't become like him." His face softened, just for a moment. He reached up, touching her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin. "I'm doing this for you, to keep you safe." Tears filled her eyes, her voice breaking. "I don't want you to protect me. I want you to stay with me. I want you to be the man I fell in love with. Not this." His jaw clenched, his eyes flickering with pain. "I can't lose you, Julia, not to him." He pulled away, his movements quick, resolute. "I'm ending this, tonight." And then he was gone, the door slamming behind him. Julia stood there, her body trembling, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to chase after him, to stop him, but she was frozen, fear anchoring her to the spot. She looked down at her phone, Adam's voice still echoing in her ears. Make her disappear. She had to warn him. She had to do something before it was too late. Her fingers moved quickly, dialing a number she never thought she'd use. The line rang once, then twice, before a familiar voice answered. "Detective Harris." Her voice shook, her words tumbling. "Out." "It's Julia. I have evidence. Adam's planning something dangerous. And Ethan, he's going to do something terrible." Detective Harris's voice was sharp, alert. "Where is he?" "He's going after Adam. I think he's going to kill him." There was a pause, the gravity of her words sinking in. Where would he go? Julia's heart raced, her mind spinning. The bar, the one on 5th. That's where I found Adam tonight. That's where he's headed. Harris's voice was firm. decisive. "Stay where you are. I'll handle it." The line went dead, and Julia was left standing in the silence, her body trembling, her heart aching. She had done the right thing. She had to believe that. But as the minutes stretched on, fear and guilt twisted inside her. What if she was wrong? What if she had just betrayed Ethan all over again? She sank to the floor, her back against the wall, her hands shaking. "Please, let him be okay. Please, don't let me lose him." The night dragged on, the shadows growing longer, deeper, and Julia waited, alone, praying for forgiveness that might never come. The hours felt endless, each tick of the clock echoing through the empty house. Julia sat on the floor, her knees drawn to her chest, her eyes fixed on the front door. She half expected Ethan to burst through it, his face torn between anger and relief. But the house remained silent, her hope fading with every passing second. Her phone vibrated, the sharp sound slicing through the quiet. She scrambled to grab it, her heart leaping when she saw Detective Harris's name on the screen. She answered on the first ring. "Hello?" "It's over," Harris said, his voice grim. "We got there in time. No one's dead. But it was close." Relief flooded through her, so powerful it left her dizzy. She sank against the wall, her body going limp. "Where is he?" "At the station. He's not under arrest, but he's being questioned. We need to sort through what happened." Harris's tone softened. "He asked for you." Julia was on her feet before he finished speaking. "I'm coming." The drive to the station was a blur. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, her mind racing through 1,000 scenarios. What would she say? What would he say? She reached the precinct, her heart pounding as she walked inside. Harris met her in the hallway, his expression weary. "He's in interview room 3. He's shaken up, but he's cooperating." She hesitated. What happened?" Harris sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He confronted Adam outside the bar. Things got heated. Words were exchanged, threats were made. Ethan pulled a gun. Julia's heart dropped. "Oh, God." "He didn't shoot," Harris added quickly. "But he was close. Very close. My team intervened just in time. Adam's pressing charges for assault and attempted murder. We're working through it, but it's messy." She closed her eyes, nausea twisting her stomach. "Can I see him?" Harris nodded, stepping aside. "Go easy on him. He's not himself." She walked down the hall, her footsteps echoing off the cold tile floor. She paused outside the door, her hand hovering over the handle. Her heart raced, her breath unsteady. Then she pushed the door open. Ethan sat at the metal table, his shoulders hunched, his face buried in his hands. He looked up as she entered, his eyes bloodshot, his face pale. The sight shattered her. He looked broken, defeated, a shell of the man she had loved. She stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind her. "Ethan." His eyes were haunted, his voice hollow. "You called Harris." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and cold. She took a step closer, her hands trembling. "I had to. You were going to kill him." His jaw tightened, his shoulders tensing. I just wanted to scare him." His voice cracked. "I wanted him to feel the way I've been feeling, trapped, helpless, destroyed." Tears filled her eyes, her heart aching. "I was scared, Ethan. Scared that you'd do something you couldn't take back, that you'd become someone you're not." His expression crumbled, pain flickering across his face. "Maybe I already am." He looked away, his shoulders slumping. "I don't know who I am anymore, not after everything he did, everything you did." She felt the sting of his words, the guilt pressing down on her. "I never meant to hurt you. I was weak. I made a mistake. But I never stopped loving you." He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Love? Is that what this is? He looked at her, his eyes cold. I don't even know if I believe in love anymore. Not after this. The words hit her like a punch, the air leaving her lungs. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Ethan stood, his movements slow, weary. They're letting me go. Harris says the charges won't stick, but Adam's going to sue. He's going to drag this out, make it as painful as he can. And you know what? He laughed again, his voice raw. He'll probably win, because I lost the moment I let him get to me, the moment I let him take you. Julia reached out, her fingers, brushing his arm. He didn't take me. I made a mistake, but I'm still here. I still want us. I still want you. He looked down at her hand, his eyes softening for just a moment before they hardened again. He pulled away, his voice cold. I can't do this. Not now. Not after everything. He walked to the door, his shoulders rigid, his back to her. I need time. Space. To figure out who I am without you. Without any of this. Panic surged through her. She moved toward him, her voice breaking. Ethan, please, don't leave. Don't let him win. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. He already won. The moment you chose him, he won. The door swung open, and then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Julia stood there, alone in the cold, empty room, her heart shattered. She had fought to save him, to save them, but maybe it was already too late. She sank into the chair he had left behind, her tears falling onto the metal table, and for the first time, she truly understood the price of betrayal. Julia sat in the sterile room for what felt like hours, the weight of Ethan's words echoing in her mind. The moment you chose him. He won. Her chest ached with the rawness of it all. She had betrayed him. No matter the reasons, no matter the justifications, she had chosen someone else over him. And now, he was slipping away from her further than she could reach. She rose slowly, her legs weak beneath her. The silence in the room felt suffocating, a reflection of the silence between them now. Ethan had walked out of her life, and she had no idea how to get him back. The sound of footsteps in the hallway startled her, and she turned to see Detective Harris approaching, his face worn with the weight of the evening's events. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. You okay? She wiped her eyes quickly, though the tears kept coming. No, I'm not okay. Harris nodded, his gaze softening. I know. But you did the right thing, Julia. You stopped him before it got worse. I don't know, she whispered, her voice shaking. I thought I was helping him. But maybe I just made it worse. Maybe it's over. Harris crossed his arms, leaning against the door frame. You can't force someone to change, especially when they don't see how far they've fallen. His eyes softened. You both need time. And maybe, just maybe, time will heal the wounds. But it's up to him to come to that conclusion. She nodded slowly, her thoughts spinning. Could time heal what had been broken? Would Ethan ever forgive her for the betrayal? Or was this the end of their story, no matter how much she wished it weren't? Is he... She hesitated, then asked, is he really free to go? Yeah. For now. The charges won't stick. They'll make it look like he lost his temper, but there's no solid evidence to make it stick beyond a simple assault charge. We're not going to push it unless Adam decides to press further, but he might. Harris's voice took on a note of warning. That's something you both need to be prepared for. Julia nodded absently. Adam. Always Adam. Always the puppet master pulling strings from the shadows. He had been the catalyst, but Ethan had let him push him to the edge. Had Julia? Had she done the same by hiding her own secrets from Ethan? She couldn't keep asking herself the same questions. At some point, she had to make a choice. Either fight for Ethan or let him go. "I should go," she said softly, her voice quiet but resolute. Harris gave her a long, searching look before stepping aside. "Take care of yourself, Julia, and take care of him, if you can. He's going to need someone to help him find his way back." She didn't respond. She simply turned, walking toward the exit, her feet heavy with each step. The night air hit her like a cold slap when she stepped outside. The world felt distant, unreal, as if she were moving through a fog. Her mind couldn't settle on anything, not even the road ahead of her. She needed to see Ethan. She had to find him. The drive was instinctive, her hands gripping the wheel tightly, her heart pounding with each passing mile. When she pulled into the driveway, her headlights cut through the darkness, casting long shadows across the lawn. She parked quickly, almost too quickly, and ran up the front steps, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open, and her heart stopped when she saw Ethan sitting on the couch, his back to her, staring out the window. He didn't turn when she entered, his shoulders stiff, as though he were holding the weight of the world on them. "Ethan?" He didn't respond. She stepped closer, her voice tentative. "Please, talk to me." Still, he said nothing. The silence between them felt like a physical presence, pressing against her chest. She moved to sit beside him, unsure whether he would allow it, but he didn't pull away, and she took that as permission. Slowly, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his. He flinched slightly but didn't pull away. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. For everything. I never meant to hurt you, but I did, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if I can." He turned his head slowly, his eyes red-rimmed, the exhaustion and pain etched on his face. "I don't know how to forgive you, Julia. I don't know if I even want to anymore." His voice was low, rough with emotion. "You've been hiding things from me for so long. I don't even know who you are anymore." Her heart shattered, but she couldn't look away. "I've been hiding from you, from everything. I thought if I buried the truth I could protect us, but I only made it worse. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you until it was too late." Ethan stared at her for a long time, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't know if I can trust you again." Julia's throat closed up. She had known this moment would come. She had feared it. But now that it was here, the days that followed felt like walking through a fog for Julia. Every step seemed uncertain. Every word she spoke to Ethan felt as though it might be the last. They didn't talk much, at least not the way they used to. Their conversations were clipped, fragmented, as though they were strangers trying to find a way back to the familiarity they once shared. Ethan kept to himself more than usual. He would spend hours in the garage, tinkering with tools and broken projects, as if the act of fixing things that were already broken could somehow repair the damage inside him. Julia didn't push. She stayed in the house, occupying herself with work, but her thoughts were constantly with him, wondering when or if he would ever come back to her. Then, one afternoon, when the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows, across the living room, Ethan finally spoke. "I talked to my brother today," he said, sitting on the edge of the couch, staring at the floor. Julia froze, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't expected him to talk about anything that mattered. Not yet. "And?" she asked, her voice cautious but soft. Ethan's eyes flickered up to meet hers for the briefest of moments, then lowered again. "He thinks I should forgive." "You!" Her breath caught in her throat. Forgive her? Could forgiveness still be possible after everything that had happened? The lies, the affair, the deception. She'd asked herself the same question 100 times, but hearing it from Ethan, hearing it from someone else, even his brother, made it all feel more real. "And what do you think?" she whispered, her voice trembling despite her attempt to steady it. Ethan didn't answer right away. He seemed to be weighing the words in his mind, trying to decide if he could even let himself believe it. "I don't know," he said finally. "I don't know if I can just move past this. The betrayal, the lies, everything. It's not that simple." "I never thought it would be," Julia said quietly, her chest tight. "But I want to try. If you'll let me, I want to try to fix it, to make it right, somehow." He nodded, slowly. "I need time, Julia. Time to think. Time to figure out if I can even trust you again. If I can trust myself to make the right decision." Julia felt a pang in her chest at his words. She knew he wasn't ready. She knew he might never be ready, but she couldn't give up now. She wouldn't. "I'll wait," she said softly. "I'll wait as long as you need." The days turned into weeks, and Julia's patience was tested in ways she hadn't expected. Ethan didn't pull away completely, but he was distant, almost like he was carrying some heavy weight that he couldn't share with her. She understood. She had hurt him. But the silence between them began to feel more suffocating than ever. It wasn't until one night, after dinner, when Ethan returned from another long day of working on the house, that something shifted. They were sitting on the couch together, the glow of the lamp casting a soft light over their faces, when he turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Julia," he began, his voice soft but steady. "I've been thinking about everything, about us, about what I want." Her heart skipped a beat, but she remained still, her breath shallow. "I can't just pretend like everything's okay," he continued. "I can't just forget what happened." His words were raw, edged with pain. "But I don't want to lose you. I don't want to throw everything away, and I don't know if that means forgiveness or something else." Julia swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that were threatening to spill over. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I don't expect you to forget either, but I need you to know I'm here, and I'll be here for as long as it takes." Ethan reached out, his hand finding hers in the silence. For a moment, neither of them spoke, but the weight between them seemed to lessen, just a little, and Julia allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild. But the road ahead was still long, and neither of them knew where it would lead. Every day was a step into the unknown, a gamble. But at least they were walking it together, however uncertain and fragile that path might be. Weeks later, Julia received a letter in the mail. It was from Adam. Her heart sank as she saw his name on the return address. She hadn't heard from him since that night. Had he been the one pulling the strings all along, even now? She opened the envelope slowly, her fingers trembling. "Julia," it began. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, and I want you to know that I never meant for things to get this far. But you've made your choice. Ethan doesn't deserve this, and you need to figure out if you're really ready to live with the consequences." The letter continued, but Julia barely read the rest. The words blurred together, and all she could focus on was the fact that Adam had been watching them, still manipulating, still trying to control the situation from the shadows. As the weeks bled into months, Julia found herself caught between hope and fear, love and doubt. The fragile truce between her and Ethan held, but it was tempered with an unspoken tension. Every day was a reminder of the distance between them, a reminder of the betrayal that had cracked their foundation. Yet there were moments, fleeting moments, where things felt like they might return to what they once were, like they could be whole again. Ethan had been quieter, more contemplative. He was trying, she could tell, but he also seemed to be waging a battle inside himself. There were times when he would look at her with something close to tenderness in his eyes, only for the look to fade as quickly as it had appeared. Other times, he would go silent when she tried to reach out, as though the words were too much to bear. Their routine became predictable, but within that predictability was a kind of fragile peace. They went through the motions: breakfast, work, small, talk at dinner, the occasional shared laugh. But at night, in the silence of their bed, Julia felt the weight of the unspoken words hanging between them. There was so much left unsaid, so many things that both of them were afraid to address, as if acknowledging them would shatter the fragile peace they were trying to maintain. Then, one evening, something shifted. Julia had been cleaning out a drawer in the kitchen when she found the old photo albums, the ones they had collected over the years. Their wedding, vacations, family gatherings. She hadn't seen them in months. She sat down on the floor, flipping through the pages, each image pulling her deeper into the past, into the moments before everything had unraveled. Her eyes lingered on one photograph, a candid shot of her, and Ethan laughing, their arms wrapped around each other, their faces flushed with joy. They looked so carefree, so in love. It felt like another lifetime. A sharp pang of regret twisted inside her. She didn't hear Ethan come into the room. "I remember that day," he said softly, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "We spent the whole day at the beach, just the two of us. It was one of the best days of my life." Julia looked up at him, her chest tight. "I remember," she whispered. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, searching for something in her eyes. She couldn't tell if it was hope or just the exhaustion of trying to make sense of everything. "I've been thinking a lot about us," Ethan said, moving closer, "about what happened and about what's next." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" Ethan knelt down beside her, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you did, Julia," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But I also don't know if I can walk away. We've been through so much, and I still love you. Even with everything, I still love you." Tears pricked at the corners of Julia's eyes. She had been afraid of this moment, afraid of the rawness of his words, of the vulnerability they both had to face. "I've hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to fix that. I don't know if I can. But I'm here, Ethan. I'm here, trying to be the person I was before everything changed." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, thick with emotions neither could fully articulate. Finally, Ethan reached out and took her hand in his, the touch gentle but firm. "Maybe we don't need to fix everything right now," he said. "Maybe we just need to start with being here, together, and see where it goes." Julia nodded, feeling a fragile but unmistakable shift in the air. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, and it wasn't the easy resolution she had hoped for, but it was something. It was a beginning, and for the first time in a long while, Julia felt a small spark of hope. Days passed, and the routine of their lives resumed. It was slower now, more deliberate. They were still navigating the jagged edges of their relationship, but there were moments, tender moments, where they could feel the thread of connection beginning to stitch itself back together. But there were still shadows, lingering doubts. Julia knew she couldn't erase the past. She couldn't undo what she had done. And she knew Ethan's healing would take time, maybe more time than she had the strength to give. He hadn't fully forgiven her, and perhaps he never would. But he was trying. He was still here. And that was all she could ask for. A few weeks later, Ethan received an unexpected phone call. Julia was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when she heard him speak in low, tense tones. She tried to ignore the rising curiosity in her chest, but it was impossible. When the call ended, Ethan remained still for a long moment, staring at his phone, lost in thought. Julia watched him, but she didn't say anything. She had learned that some things, some moments, needed to be approached with caution. "Everything okay?" she asked finally, her voice soft. The days that followed the news about Adam's arrest were a blur. Julia and Ethan continued their quiet existence, the space between them marked by both cautious optimism and lingering tension. The phone calls from the police, the occasional whispers of gossip that spread like wildfire, and the constant threat of what Adam's downfall might mean for them. It all contributed to the unease that permeated their lives. Ethan had been preoccupied, dealing with the fallout at work, trying to distance himself from the man who had been a mentor, a friend, and ultimately a betrayer. Julia tried to support him, but there was a sense that even though they were living under the same roof, they were still separated by an invisible wall. The air felt thick with unspoken words, with the weight of the past that neither of them could quite shake off. It was a late evening, just after dinner, when Julia found herself sitting alone on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. Ethan had been gone for most of the day, meeting with his lawyer, piecing together the last remnants of his connection to Adam. She hadn't asked many questions, knowing that now wasn't the time to press him for answers. But the silence was stifling, and the distance between them was growing. The sound of the front door opening broke her from her thoughts, and she looked up as Ethan entered, his face drawn, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "How did it go?" she asked softly, setting her book aside. Ethan closed the door behind him, leaning against it for a moment before he answered. "It's not good, Julia. They've traced some of Adam's activities to me. Not directly, but there are connections. Things I should have noticed." Her heart sank. "What does that mean? Are you in trouble?" Ethan took a deep breath, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know yet. I'm being questioned as a potential accomplice, but they don't have anything concrete. They're still building their case." Julia stood up, her mind spinning with questions, but none of them seemed to make sense. "But you didn't know anything about what he was doing, right? This is ridiculous." "I didn't know," Ethan said, his voice tight. "But I should have. I should have seen the signs. I let him manipulate me for so long that I didn't even realize how far he'd gone." There it was again, the crushing weight of guilt hanging over him like a storm cloud. Julia could see it in the way he held himself, in the way his shoulders hunched, like the world was slowly closing in on him. She wanted to reach out, to pull him close, and tell him everything would be okay. But she knew it wasn't that simple. She swallowed, trying to steady herself. "Ethan, you can't keep blaming yourself for what Adam did. He made his choices. You didn't. You don't owe him anything." Ethan turned away from her, pacing toward the window. The dim streetlight outside cast long shadows across his face. "It's not just about what Adam did," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It's about everything. About how we got here. How I didn't see it coming, how I didn't protect us. He stopped himself, his voice breaking, and he ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "I didn't protect you, Julia, and that's on me." She felt the knot tighten in her chest again, but this time it was different. She stepped toward him, slowly, as if afraid to startle him, and placed a hand on his arm. "Ethan," she said gently, "this isn't just on you, it's on both of us. We both made mistakes. We both let things slide until it was too late. But blaming ourselves isn't going to fix anything." He met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and something else. Something she hadn't seen in him in months. Vulnerability. "I don't know what to do anymore, Julia. he whispered. I don't know how to make this right. Julia's heart ached at the rawness of his words. She wanted to fix everything, to erase the betrayal, to go back to when they were happy. But life didn't work that way. All they could do was take one step forward at a time, even if it felt like they were walking in the dark. I don't know either, she replied, her voice quiet. But I'm here. I'm here, and I'm willing to try. We don't have to have all the answers right now. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing her words, and then he nodded, a subtle shift in his posture. I'll try, too. I want to make things right, Julia. I really do. It wasn't a promise, not in the way she had once hoped, but it was something. A beginning, perhaps. A fragile thread between them that had been frayed but not entirely severed. Weeks passed, and things didn't get easier. There were still moments of tension, still cracks in their communication, still that gnawing sense of uncertainty that hung over them. But they were learning to navigate it, slowly. They had stopped pretending that things were fine, that everything would just fall into place. Instead, the days that followed were filled with the kind of quiet that comes when two people are trying to understand each other, trying to rebuild something from the wreckage of their lives. Julia and Ethan were no longer pretending that things could go back to how they were, but they had found a delicate rhythm, a kind of truce between their past pain and their present reality. Ethan continued to attend therapy, though he was still guarded about sharing too much. Julia, on the other hand, found herself opening up more, not just to her therapist, but to Ethan as well. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the old bitterness, the sharp edges of resentment, threatened to rise to the surface. But they were trying. They were both trying. One Saturday afternoon, Julia sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a book, her mind distracted by thoughts of what still lay ahead. She heard the sound of keys in the door and looked up to see Ethan walking in. He was holding a manila envelope, his expression unreadable. "What's that?" she asked, her voice tentative. Ethan glanced at her before walking over and placing the envelope on the counter. "It's the final report from the investigator," he said, quietly. "About Adam." Julia's stomach tightened at the mention of Adam's name, still a shadow in their lives despite his arrest. It felt like the ghost of their past was never far behind. "What does it say?" she asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Ethan hesitated for a moment before answering. "That Adam wasn't working alone. There's evidence now that he had connections to a larger network, maybe even some of the people I thought I could trust." Julia's pulse quickened, and she stood, walking toward him. "What does that mean for you? For us?" Ethan met her gaze, his eyes dark with a mix of frustration and exhaustion. "It means that the mess I thought was just Adam's has bigger implications. Some of the things I thought were personal betrayals might have been part of something far worse." The room seemed to close in on her as she processed his words. There was a part of her that wanted to close it all off, to pretend that they could forget about the world outside their home. But deep down, she knew it was no longer possible to ignore the fact that their lives had been intertwined with something far more dangerous than they had realized. "Are you in danger?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan shook, his head, but his lack of certainty was obvious. "I don't know, I don't think so, but I can't be sure. The more I look at this, the more I see how much I missed. I've spent so long trusting the wrong people, Julia. I don't know if I can fix this." Julia's heart ached as she watched him. She knew he was beating himself up, still haunted by the idea that he could have stopped it all, that he could have seen the signs before it was too late. But she also knew deep down that this wasn't just about Adam anymore. It was about Ethan's struggle to come to terms with the way he had failed them both. "Ethan," she said softly, stepping closer. "We're both figuring out how to move forward. This mess doesn't have to define us." Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with something that resembled fear. "But how do you forgive this, Julia?" How do you forgive what I allowed to happen? Julia took a deep breath. I don't know yet, she admitted. I don't think forgiveness is a one-time thing. I think it's something we have to keep choosing every day. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you, Ethan, but I do know that I want to try. Because if we don't, if we let this be the end of us, then everything we've built means nothing. There was a long silence between them, thick with the weight of her words. Ethan looked at her, his face unreadable, but his eyes softened. I want to try too. I don't want this to be the end. For the first time in a long while, Julia allowed herself to believe that perhaps they could rebuild, piece by piece, and that the betrayal might not be the defining chapter of their story. Weeks turned into months, and while the scars of what had happened never fully faded, Julia and Ethan found a way to live with them. There were moments of doubt, times when the weight of their past felt like too much to carry, but they always came back to each other. Slowly, they rebuilt their connection, learning to communicate in ways they had never before. The investigation into Adam's network continued to unfold, and although it didn't directly threaten Ethan anymore, the shadows of the past were never far. But Ethan no longer let them consume him. He had found a way to live in the present, to take responsibility for the things he could control, and to be honest with Julia in a way he hadn't before. As the seasons changed, so did their relationship. It wasn't perfect. It was still fragile, but it was real. They had both learned hard lessons about trust, about forgiveness, about the messiness of life. As the months passed, Julia and Ethan continued to navigate the delicate terrain of their marriage. Each day was a step toward rebuilding what they had once taken for granted: trust, intimacy, and a shared sense of future. But the scars were there, just beneath the surface, reminders of a time when everything had been threatened by betrayal. Julia had started to notice the subtle changes in Ethan. He no longer drowned himself in his work as he had before, using it as a shield against the discomfort of their fractured relationship. Instead, he began to focus more on their home, on her. Little things, surprising her with dinner, leaving her notes in the mornings, asking about her day with genuine interest. At times, it felt like they were rediscovering each other all over again, relearning how to be a couple in a world where so much had fallen apart. But there were still moments when the past crept in, when the silence between them wasn't comfortable, but strained, heavy with unspoken thoughts. There were nights when Julia couldn't sleep, her mind racing with questions she wasn't sure she wanted the answers to. Had she truly forgiven him? Or was she simply pretending for the sake of moving forward? Could she ever fully erase the image of Adam's betrayal, the way it had shattered her sense of security? And Ethan? Could he ever truly forgive himself for the things he had missed, for the secrets he had let fester until they became something monstrous? One evening, after a long day, they sat together in the living room, the low hum of the city. Outside their window, the only sound breaking the stillness. Julia looked over at Ethan, his face tired but peaceful, and for a moment she wondered what it would be like to let go of all the pain, to stop questioning everything. But she knew that wasn't realistic. That wasn't how healing worked. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't found out about Adam? Julia asked, her voice soft. Ethan shifted in his seat, his eyes thoughtful. I think about it all the time, he admitted. There were so many things I could have done differently. So many things I should have seen. But I was too caught up in the idea that everything was fine, that everything was under control. Julia nodded, her throat tight. She could feel the weight of his words, the idea that everything could have stayed hidden forever, that they might have continued to live in that comfortable but ultimately false space, haunted her in ways she couldn't explain. I don't know how to make sense of it, Ethan. How do we move forward when we're still living with the wreckage of the past? Ethan's gaze softened, his expression sincere. I don't have the answers. I just know that I don't want to live with that wreckage anymore. I know I hurt you, and I don't think I'll ever stop feeling guilty about that. But I'm trying to make it right. I'm trying to show you that I'm here, that I can be the partner you need. Julia's heart ached, but it was a different kind of ache now. It wasn't the raw, burning pain of betrayal. It was the quiet ache of something fragile, something she wasn't sure was strong enough to survive the storms they had weathered. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand. I want to believe you. I want to believe that we can get through this. But I don't know how much more I can handle, Ethan. His eyes met hers, and for the first time in a long while, she saw the vulnerability there, the uncertainty. I know, and I'll never ask you to forget. I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't happen. But I want to give us the chance to build something new. I don't want this to define us forever. The words hung in the air between them, as if they were both waiting for some kind of resolution. Julia stared at their hands, entwined now, and wondered what the future would really look like for them. It wasn't going to be easy. The trust they had once shared had been broken, and while the cracks could be filled, they could never truly disappear. But there was something in the way they were sitting there, side by side, something in the tentative but steady rhythm of their breathing that made her think there was still a chance. What if I'm not ready? Julia whispered. What if I need more time? Ethan squeezed her hand gently, his voice steady. Then we take more time. We do this on your terms. But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. The weeks that followed were filled with moments of uncertainty and quiet. Hope. Julia still had her doubts about their future, about the possibility of true forgiveness, about what kind of marriage they could have after everything they'd been through. But she saw the effort Ethan was putting in, the slow but steady way. He was proving that he was committed to making things right. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a sweeping declaration of undying love. It was the small, everyday things that mattered, the willingness to listen, to communicate, to be patient with each other.